Thank you for joining us today for the release of the 2023-2024 Standards of Learning data results. For those of you I do not know, I'm Emily Ann Gullickson, Deputy Secretary of Education. As the governor has highlighted before, it takes all of us to prioritize our K-12 students. That's why we'd like to recognize a few of our key champions in education here today, including 2 of our State Board of Education members and members of the General Assembly. I'd like to specifically recognize our school division superintendents here today. Please stand when you hear your name. Superintendent Rick Bowling of Bath County Public Schools, Superintendent Melody Hackney, Hopewell City Public Schools, Superintendent Christy Somerville Majette, Brunswick County Public Schools, Superintendent of the Year and Chronic Absenteeism Task Force member Doug Straitley, Louisa County Public Schools, and newly appointed Superintendent and Chronic Absenteeism Task Force member Clint Mitchell of Spotsylvania County Public Schools. Let's give them an applause. To the other advocates in the room, thank you for all that you do for Virginia's students and parents. And I'd like to recognize the outstanding Department of Education team and leadership members here in the room today. Thank you. Now, it is my pleasure to turn the stage over to a true champion for K-12 students, our Governor, Glenn Youngkin.
Thank you. Oh, good morning, everyone, and thank you, Deputy Secretary Gullickson, for the warm introductions and welcomes to everybody. I also just want to, on behalf of Secretary Gadara, who was not feeling 100% today, thank you for stepping in and playing such an important role. Superintendent Coons, thank you for the work that you do, and we look forward to hearing your in-depth assessment of the results today. I want to stop for a minute and put into perspective what we are going to discuss today. First of all, Virginia continues to be ranked very highly in all kinds of ratings, like CNBC's Top State for Business. We were ranked #1 in education. That was very exciting. The reality of that recognition is that our higher ed institutions are very highly thought of, and K through 12 is very highly thought of. Many of the inputs into those assessments are driven by funding, driven by student-teacher ratios, and as a result, that, in fact, constantly puts us, particularly with the efforts we made over the last few years, in a very high ranking. As I have said over and over again, at the heart of rankings is an assessment of what we were putting in, but what we need to also focus on, most importantly, are the results, and that's what we're going to talk about today. We, of course, over the last 2.5 years of our administration, have made a step function change in our investment in K through 12 education. We have recognized a 40% increase in K through 12 budgets since 2021, and I want to thank our colleagues from the General Assembly in supporting this most important recognition of a necessity to increase substantially the funding that is placed on K through 12 education. With that has come a concerted effort to drive our teacher pay into a much more competitive position. We had 12% increase over our first 2 years. We have now 2 subsequent 3% increases in each of the next 2 years. And the projections are that we will not only be at the national average, but through the national average during this biennium. Hugely important. If anybody hadn't noticed, teachers matter. And we deeply, deeply appreciate the tremendous commitment that teachers make. In fact, just yesterday, we had the opportunity to cut a ribbon on the Future Educators Academy. That is one of our lab schools that's going to educate, once it's fully built out, 100 new teachers a year into many of our rural counties. And that is really, really exciting. This increased investment has not only been in K through 12, but we also have seen a $1.6 billion increase in investment in higher education over the same time period, which is an 80% increase in our commitment to higher ed. But as I said earlier, and I will say again, inputs are hugely important, but results are what really, really matters. This is the 4th time that we have gathered right here in this room to talk about K through 12 education and the direction that we are heading. And each time, building on our very first gathering where we discussed our commitment to Virginia students, we have been on a path together. And today is yet another step of a very important journey. Every single one of our data releases is a snapshot into a motion picture. And I am pleased today that that motion picture will in fact show that a ship that was off course has been turned around and that we are seeing progress. But we will also say today that we have a long way to go. We have a long way to go. And I'm looking forward to the continued journey together. Superintendent Coons will go through all that data with you. But let me just remind you all of what we told you last year and what we have done and what we are seeing in summary. Over a course of 8 years, there was a systematic reduction in standards. And what do we mean by that? What we mean is that the number of questions that it required to get right on a test to determine proficiency was reduced. And what that meant is that students did better on Virginia's tests than they did on nationally recognized or oftentimes internationally recognized tests, like the National Assessment of Educational Progress. The cut scores on Virginia's test oftentimes suggested that students were proficient when in fact on national tests they weren't. And we called that increasing gap an honesty gap, because we want to make sure we understand where our students really are so that then we can direct resources and effort to get them to where they need to be. And that, of course, was something that was highlighted last year when we gathered. The SOL scores last year demonstrated that this honesty gap had manifested itself in very difficult to address learning loss. Of course, students didn't have the foundation that they needed going into the pandemic. And sadly, schools were closed for an extended, unnecessary period of time. We were 47th in the nation in getting our schools back open. And as a result, particularly 3rd through 8th graders suffered substantial learning loss. And that is where we went to work. We went to work with bold action last year. Bold action to, in fact, launch an effort to address the fact that 60% of our 3rd through 8th graders were either failing or at risk of failing their reading SOLs, and nearly 2/3 of our 3rd through 8th graders were failing or at risk of failing their math SOLs. And that was the circumstance that pulled us all together to launch All in Virginia. Because what we saw was students who not only were not recovering, but sadly, getting worse. And particular groups of students were suffering in a disproportionate way. And those were economically disadvantageous students. Those were students who had English as a second language or English language learners. And of course, our students with disabilities. We had real work to do. On top of that, what we saw was chronic absenteeism had become a shocking reality. And 1 in 5 students were chronically absent from school. Think about that. Kindergartners, 1st graders, 2nd graders, 3rd graders, chronically absent to the tune of 1 in 5. Now, what we also know is that chronic absenteeism is one of the big factors in students' inability to recover from substantial learning loss. They're not in school, they're not going to catch up. And so the effort as we launched All In was to tackle 3 areas. First, let's introduce intensive tutoring statewide. Second of all, let's put together the best minds and to try to tackle chronic absenteeism. And finally, with the great innovation of the Virginia Literacy Act let's accelerate the implementation of the Virginia Literacy Act. And that's exactly what we did. The budget that was passed last September, albeit late, had a substantial amount of funding in it. $418 million was dedicated to the all-in effort. It was a multi-year effort to span over 3 years. And what happened in the fall was the administration, the Department of Education, superintendents across the Commonwealth, and of course, administrators in schools and educators went to work. And by December, every single Virginia school division had submitted an all-in plan, and the Virginia Department of Education was reviewing those plans and helping and supporting the launch of intense tutoring, of a focus on accelerating the Virginia Literacy Act, and of course tackling chronic absenteeism. That work started in a substantial uniform way in January. And so the results today reflect that effort mostly seen in a January to April time period. We also saw the launch of dedicated additional resources across the statewide tutoring platforms like Zern and Ignite, which of course the superintendent will elaborate more deeply on, that enable students to also get incremental help along the way. The net is that we are making real progress. We're turning the ship. That turning of the ship is going to require even more effort. We had 4 months of concerted effort across the Commonwealth, and now we start this next academic year with the opportunity to have a full academic year of continuing effort. And that, I think, will be very exciting. What we'll see today is that 70% of school divisions have seen improvement in reading scores. 75% of school divisions have seen improvement in math scores. There are learnings between those school divisions that have seen substantial improvements and those that haven't. And that's part of the best practice sharing, the best way to implement intensive tutoring that will be, of course, incorporated across all in. We've seen improvements in 3rd through 8th grade reading. We've seen even more substantial improvements in 3rd through 8th grade math. We've seen the hardest hit groups during the pandemic improve faster. And most importantly, we have seen that the all-in intensive tutoring efforts work. With regards to chronic absenteeism, we saw a 16% reduction in chronic absenteeism. What that means is that the efforts across the Commonwealth are working. The net is that we have some real all-stars that have led the way, and those all-stars can lead and share on how other school divisions can improve even faster. As I said, the ship is turning, and it's exciting to see it happen. What that means is that all of us need to continue to lock arms and support the efforts of intensive tutoring and support the efforts of battling chronic absenteeism and support the efforts of rolling out the Virginia Literacy Act even more comprehensively and on an accelerated basis. So with that, let me ask Superintendent Coons to walk us through the data, and then I'll come back at the end with a little bit of encouragement for next steps. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor, for discussing where we were last year. On September 7th, the department, the secretary, and the governor showed data that continued to demonstrate that student learning loss persisted and students were not recovering on their own. As Secretary Gadara flagged in 2022, Virginia had the largest decline in NAEP performance of any other state in both fourth grade reading and mathematics. That decline did not match the SOL results and what they were telling us in 2022. And instead, students, families, and teachers thought students were recovering better than they actually were. In addition, our former State Board of Education lowered those cut scores in 2019, as the governor discussed, which was implemented in the first year after the pandemic. This change masked the impact of COVID learning loss, and more students appeared to pass. Last year, we introduced low proficient scores to show those students who would likely not have passed if those cut scores had not been changed. These students we consider at risk. They're not necessarily ready for the next grade level and the rigorous coursework that is there. You see that gap as well in our mathematics scores last year. In addition, as the governor mentioned, we have gaps in our students that are in their disadvantaged groups, whether they're our Black or Hispanic student groups, were hit harder by COVID learning loss and saw more declines in their scores. In addition, many students, such as our economically disadvantaged, our English learners, and our students with disabilities who were already behind, saw even more loss. However, our high schools told us a different story last year. We had just 1% below our pre-pandemic rates in our reading EOC cut scores, and our math scores were on track to improve. So we were seeing our high school students bounce back last year. But what was abundantly clear last year was that students who attended school had a better chance of improving their learning, and students who didn't struggled more than their peers. Virginia students who had missed 18 or more days after the pandemic, so much that our chronic absenteeism doubled post-pandemic. We were 10% chronically absent prior, and our students were 20% after the pandemic last year in 2023. We also learned that those students who were chronically absent, who missed at least 18 days a year, which sounds like a lot, but is only 2 days a month on average, scored 18 percentage points lower last year in reading and 25 percentage points lower in mathematics. So we were at a crossroads. And what we did, the governor discussed. On September 7th, the governor announced All in Virginia and called all Virginians together to help accelerate learning recovery for students across the Commonwealth. This intensive focus and $418 million investment and funding commitment from the governor and the General Assembly provided the support and the focus for school divisions to create 3-year all-in Virginia plans to change the course for their students. As the governor mentioned, every single school division submitted their plan by December, and many started tutoring as early as October. However, as you can see from our timeline, statewide, all students had about 4 months during the school year of focused tutoring. So what did all of our divisions do when they looked at all in and all learning supports and high intensive tutoring? What does that mean? Many of our school divisions hired additional tutors, paid teachers stipends, and expanded tutoring during the school day. They offered hours before school, after school, on Saturdays to make sure there was more time. They looked at their summer programs. School divisions added summer school hours. They made sure at-risk students were attending summer programming, and many schools added days to the school year this year to expand the programming and intervention supports. The State Department released statewide free personalized tutoring supplements, Zern, Lexia, and Ignite, which allowed supports for students in addition to that tutoring to allow them to practice whether it was intensive reading development in Ignite or AI personalized tutoring in mathematics. We now have 119 school divisions signed up for those free tutoring services this school year. In addition, the governor talked about accelerating the Virginia Literacy Act. 100% of their school divisions submitted their K-3 division literacy plans this summer. Over 10,803 K-3 teachers have been trained in a new literacy screener, which helps identify students struggling with literacy earlier. We've accomplished over 142,205 hours of training to make sure our educators are ready for implementing the Virginia Literacy Act this year. And finally, All In had chronic absenteeism as a key component. We know that our plans and our schools all looked at what their chronic absenteeism challenges were and added implementation supports in their plans. The governor asked us to establish a statewide chronic absenteeism task force, and I want to shout out two of our members, Dr. Mitchell and Dr. Straley, who served on that statewide chronic absenteeism task force that looked at things like transportation, looked at things like making sure students had a healthy breakfast every morning, removing mental health barriers, and ensuring we were re-engaging families. That task force developed an action kit, which was launched at our superintendent's conference in January, and then we had a symposium of attendance specialists who came together and looked at the resources in the kit and personalized those to their own school division. The department launched an Attendance Matters VA campaign to make sure we were spreading the word that it is so important for children to come to school. And we had a cohort of over 200 principals that worked on their own plans in their own school divisions on how to remove barriers and make sure students were coming to school. So now where are we? What does our data say? We know, as the governor said, chronic absenteeism rate fell 16% statewide, which means over 40,000 students are attending school more regularly last year than the prior years. Our reading and math improved, and our student groups, our English learners, our students with disabilities, Black students, economically disadvantaged students are showing faster growth. And as we talked about prior, those are the students that were hardest hit by COVID-19. And most importantly, our school divisions who have implemented strong all-in plans and maximized evidence-based resources have seen the most growth in attendance, reading, and mathematics. If you look at our reading results, we will show those in that fail, at risk, and high proficient advanced. We are seeing increases in our high proficient and advanced students. Students are ready for the literacy work of the next grade level. We're seeing a reduction in students who are failing. And if we dig in, as the governor said, 70% of our school divisions are seeing improvement. An additional 10% are maintaining their progress, while 19% still have work to do. We know that our smaller divisions are showing improvement faster, which is tempering our overall results in reading. And as we look at our student groups, the ones who are hardest hit by COVID-19, we are seeing improvements. And when we look and dig in at our economically disadvantaged students, we are seeing double rates of growth than we did in prior years. That means almost 3 in 5 economically disadvantaged students passed in this past year. We know we have work still to do because they are 13 percentage points behind their peers, but we are seeing improvement. And most importantly, our English learners are showing more than 6 times the rate of growth than their peers, which is incredibly important because post-pandemic, only 1 in 4 English learners were proficient, and now we are at 1 in 3, but we must focus and closely progress monitor our English learner students because they are so much further behind than their peers. We are seeing improvements in our students with disabilities and improvements in all of our student groups in reading that outpace their peers. And I want to highlight Bath County. Superintendent Bowling is here, and he is one of our divisions that leaned into the all-in work in literacy. They created a community-wide focus in literacy, purchased materials early in the fall of 2022 to create urgency around early literacy instruction. They created interventions with tiered support that supported their most vulnerable learners, and they connected teachers in a regional network led by their own superintendent focusing on literacy. But most importantly, they used their all-in funds to expand the tutors so that every staff member tutors students and provides a community of learning support in Bath County. Thank you for your hard work. As we shift to mathematics, we are seeing a similar pattern in our high proficient and advanced students growing at almost 1% faster and decreasing our failure students by almost 2%. And when we dig in, over 75% of our school divisions are making improvement and moving forward in mathematics. And we are seeing that progress across the board in all school divisions, small, large, regionally, and in different socioeconomic demographics. And when we look at our gaps, where our students fell the most during post-COVID, We are seeing that same recovery in economically disadvantaged. While 2 and 3 students post-pandemic failed, they are now recovering, and we have 1 and 2 students passing. And we have to continue that focus with our economically disadvantaged and our English learners, who are recovering faster than their peers, but are still much further behind in mathematics. And finally, our students with disabilities are showing that same pattern. And I want to highlight one of our school divisions who's worked very hard in mathematics and worked to make sure their all-in plan is customized in Southside Virginia, Brunswick County, and Dr. Somerville Majette and her team hired instructional coaches to train teachers in great math instruction in the classroom every day, monitored student performance closely, and used database tutoring to make sure that tutoring adapted quickly and supported the individual needs of students. Moreover, with her all-in funding, they added more tutors so that the ratio between tutors and students was as small as possible. And most importantly, you've heard us talk many times about attendance and how important attendance is. And so we're going to talk about attendance again. This year, we saw that 16% decrease, which means in 2018-2019, we had 10% of our students chronically absent, which again means they missed 18 days of school a year, which is about 2 days a month, at least 18 days a year. We were at 20% after post-pandemic, and we are down to 16% this year, which means we are almost halfway back to pre-pandemic. So we have a significant way to go, but we have started that progress. 40,000 students are attending school more regularly, but when we think about not just our chronically absent students and all of our K-12 students, 1.2 million students missed fewer days last year, which resulted in an increase of 9 million instructional hours. That is huge. That means our children are learning, they're in school every day, and they're getting the opportunity to grow. And what we know now is similar to what we knew last year. Those students who have 90% or better attendance are scoring 19 percentage points above their peers in reading. And those students who are not here for 90% of the instruction, who miss that average of 2 days a month, 18 days a year, are scoring 26 percentage points lower than their peers in mathematics. And I want to highlight, again, our 2 chronic absenteeism superintendents, Dr. Straley and Dr. Mitchell, who served on our community. You'll see Colonial Beach. Dr. Mitchell was at Colonial Beach. He was recently appointed to Spotsylvania, so we appreciate his work in Colonial Beach, where both superintendents have served on the chronic absenteeism task force. We asked our superintendents to pilot some of the interventions that we were talking about. Some of the things that Colonial Beach did is they provided early intervention for students who were off track. They implemented school-based task forces and made sure that they were providing family supports. So much so they did home visits to create attendance plans with families and re-engage them personally in the school system. And they redesigned transportation to provide double bus routes and found ways to use innovative transportation methods, not necessarily those yellow buses, to pick up high-risk homeless students and make sure they were attending school. These case studies show the effort and hard work of our leading school divisions. There are many school divisions that are working hard and many school divisions looking to support our students, and we appreciate everything that our schools are doing and encourage all of our school divisions to network and learn together. As we look at our high school students, we are seeing a slight decrease in reading. We are seeing 1 grade level of assessments, which is our EOC, showing a 1% decrease. If we look at high school mathematics, we're seeing a slight improvement. I do want to show that high school reading is only taking 1 assessment. High school math includes Algebra 1, Algebra 2, and Geometry, and is continuing to improve and is almost back to pre-pandemic rates. And our high school science also shows slight improvement and covers earth science, biology, and chemistry. In just the 4 months of the last school year, school divisions have implemented tutoring. Over the summer, they expanded their programming, their summer school, and added school days. We have seen attendance improve after hard work and focus from our educators. We've seen our reading and math scores start to improve and turn that ship. We've seen our student group start to outpace their peers. With 2 years left and all in, we have to stay the course. We have to continue the hard work We have to ensure that every single student is learning on pace and has the opportunity to master grade level content. And now I'm going to turn it back over to you, Governor Youngkin.
Great, thank you so much. Very well done. Super. Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent Coons. And of course, we can just turn that, we can flip wherever we're going next on slides. Great. What I want to recap for everyone is that we are making progress. We have seen improvement. We have seen the direction change, but we still have a lot of work to do. And that's why All In was built as a multi-year plan. We took the fall of last year and got plans in place. We had the spring of last year to begin to implement those plans. We've demonstrated that it works. And now, this academic year, we all have to be all in. And this is where we will begin to see fundamental change. And that is why it's so exciting to see Virginia leading. You see, intensive tutoring is critical to recover. There was persistent learning loss. And the reality is that when the foundations aren't in place, recovery is hard. And therefore, it requires intervention. It requires intense tutoring. It requires that interaction that a few students can get with a tutor in a different environment than the classroom. And particularly those students who are failing or near failing, and particularly those students who may not, in fact, learn the same way as everyone else. That is why All In works. And that is why I'm so encouraged. We have seen the aircraft carrier turn around, and now it is time for us to accelerate. And that's why the work now is revising and sharing and making sure we execute. What's been very exciting is to see the basic building blocks of higher expectations for our children. And thank you to our State Board of Education for continuing to recognize that we can raise expectations for our kids, and our kids will meet them. We also can provide additional support for students that need additional support. And therefore, we can raise the ceiling and the floor. And we are in the middle of seeing that work. I also want to congratulate the Chronic Absenteeism Task Force. The learnings that have been demonstrated and are now being shared, again, work. I have to say, sometimes the smaller school divisions are more nimble and can move more quickly and can demonstrate best practices that then can be shared. But we also need to reimagine our ability to engage communities in this effort as well. And I do believe that coaches and pastors and community leaders play such a big part in not only encouraging, but holding accountable families and children to be in school. Because we do know that when they're there, they do a lot better. I'm also very excited about the fact that we've been able to extend the statewide personalized tutoring platforms all the way through 2026. And so these personalized platforms will continue to be available. And of course, what we are seeing is when they are fully engaged in a division's efforts, we see that division have better results. The all-in money will continue to be deployed. As we said, the $418 million was set up in a multi-year format so that this effort can continue. I have to say that we know that as we engage in system-wide intervention, system-wide intensive tutoring, we will continue to see accelerated progress. That is what is so exciting. And so I want to finish where I began, with thank yous. Thank you to the superintendents who are leading. Thank you to the principals that are implementing, and thank you for the teachers and the tutors that are changing students' futures. Thank you to our General Assembly for, again, stepping in and saying we need to do something bold, we need to do something immediate, and we need to do something that, again, changes the direction. And I also want to thank our Department of Education for your commitment and dedication. You see, the cross learnings are so important, and that is a fundamental role of our Department of Education. So finally, thank you all for joining me today and giving us a chance to provide this next snapshot in the motion picture that is Virginia providing the very, very best education in America for our children, recognizing that our children are the future of this Commonwealth and that the opportunities that they will be offered and the challenges that they will be facing will require them to have all of the capabilities that we know they've been endowed with. And here we are together, working with them, working with their parents and their families to unlock that unbridled opportunity. We still have work to do, and we know that. But I am confident that if we stay on our concerted, committed path, Virginia will continue to lead the nation in having the very best educational system. So, God bless you all. And it's August 20th. And as school divisions across the great Commonwealth head back, and I had a chance to see some head back for the first day yesterday, some last week that were already in, and I met some teachers yesterday that were enjoying their last couple of weeks before they head back after Labor Day. I just tell us all that this is going to be a great year for Virginia's students. God bless you, and thank you.